Okay. Hi, everybody. Just welcome to this Raven Housing Trust webinar. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes for people to join, yeah, just bear with us. We'll be starting very shortly. Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to this Raven Housing Trust webinar. To say we're just waiting for a few more people to join, and then we'll get going just in about 30 seconds or so. Okay. Okay, we'll get going now. So yeah, hello, welcome to this Raven Housing Trust webinar. It's on the journey to net zero carbon, and this particular webinar is on building new homes. My name's Stuart MacDonald. I'm the Managing Director of C Media. I'm going to be the event chair for today. Now, due to the COVID-19 situation, Raven has decided to host this series of 3 webinars this year as opposed to its usual annual stakeholder face-to-face event. The plus side of all this is that we're able to bring the discussion on these crucial sustainability issues to a much wider national audience today, and so we can ensure we get a really well-rounded discussion, which is great, and we're really keen that you all play your part in that today. So handily, the journey to net zero carbon is very much in the news today, courtesy of our Prime Minister and his speech today on investment in building back greener. I'm sure a few people have seen that over lunchtime today. Now, I'm really pleased to say we've got a fantastic panel here with us today to help talk us through the issues of how the social housing sector is at present already building greener, which is great to see. You should all see them all now on your screens, and I'll introduce them now. So we've got Ali Bennett, who's the Director of Development at Raven Housing Trust. We've got Amy Simmons, who's the Head of Policy at the National Housing Federation, and we've got John Bedford, who's the Technical Director of Development at WHG. As I say, I'm very grateful to all of you for taking the time to be with us today and share your expertise and insights. Now, before we get underway with the presentations, and I hand over to Ali to say a couple of initial introductory remarks, I just wanted to cover off a few brief things around just the way we're going to work today in terms of the format. So there'll be a 10-minute presentation from each of our speakers, and then we'll do a Q&A and discussion at the end. Now, please do post your questions for us to discuss at the end. You should all be able to see a questions box in the right-hand side of your screens. So please do use that to post some questions in there. You might not see all the questions that appear in there. It's a bit of a quirk of the system, but don't worry, we will see them all, and I'll make sure we get through as many as we can during the discussion. And just to say, after the webinar as well, everyone is going to receive a full recording of this and the slide deck as well, so you'll be able to share that with colleagues and review that at your leisure. Okay, I think that's everything I wanted to say just now. So I'm just going to get the slides up, and I'm going to pass over to Ali just for a few introductory remarks. So Ali, over to you.
That's great, thanks Stuart. Good afternoon everybody. My name is Ali Bennett and I'm the Development Director here at Raven, and we're really glad you've been able to join us today for the first, as Stuart said, in a series of webinars, particularly today in terms of talking about net zero carbon for new build, but we really wanted to bring the conversation to the sector and kind of hear what others were doing, so we can talk about how we can work together, hear about best practice and respond collectively as a sector. So it was just over a year ago that the UK became the first major economy to pass net zero emissions into law. So net zero carbon 2050 to you and I. And this has had huge implications for the whole country and for industry and for housing associations. For housing associations, this has meant we've had to be thinking about vast retrofit programs. And I feel like vast doesn't quite do it justice. When the low carbon journey recently highlighted that vast journey, if we were to start in January 21, that's 1,200 homes per week to be retrofitted to meet net zero carbon by 2050. So that's 30 years of 1,200 homes being retrofitted, which is just huge and a real challenge for us. But what about new builds? We have to consider how new supply has the potential to be adding to that retrofit issue. For now, we're still awaiting the publication of the updates to Part L, Part F, the overheating regulations, or the Future Home Standard, which others are going to come on and talk about in their presentations. But we have to consider the longer term beyond kind of 2025. Some providers are already committing to kind of EPC A or B for their new build programs. For us here at Raven, we haven't yet kind of committed to that metric because there's updates to SAP coming. There's a bit of discussion around what the right metric to use is. So at the moment, we're framing that conversation in relation to net zero carbon. So there's a lot of organisations thinking about that tension now between new supply and investment in existing for that retrofit programme. And some will be thinking, really, what does this mean for development? Do we shut up shop on development programs and direct the cash and resources into retrofit? There's other challenges as well in terms of kind of building safety requirements, the millions of pounds worth of investment across the stock. Lots of housing associations, ourselves included, are going through digital transformation programs. So there's a lot of competing demands on housing association finances, and we've all got choices to make in conversation with our boards and our residents. But key to that is we mustn't forget there continues to be a huge undersupply of housing, especially affordable housing, and arguably truly affordable housing. So I really hope that the conversation today is going to help to start shape your thinking around net zero carbon for new builds and how we can work together as a sector and rise to the challenge. So now I'm going to hand over to Amy, who, as Stuart said, is from the NatFed.
Hello, everyone. Right, I'm just going to see if I can get my slides up. Doesn't seem to be wanting to move on. Hang on. Oops.
You should be able to click on it. It should move for you.
Yeah, I'm afraid it's not. Stuart, do you mind doing the slides for me? Would that be okay?
No, fine.
Sorry about technical hitch, everybody. Right, if you could just go on to the next one. Right, hello everyone. My name's Amy Simmons and I'm one of two heads of policy at the National Housing Federation, and I'm really happy to be here today to discuss the journey to net zero focused on new build homes. At the Fed, I tend to cover anything that is sort of technically based, so I spend a lot of time considering building safety, but also changes to regulations and standards. And I work closely with our other head of policy, who is Rob Wall, and he's been leading on the sector strategy for decarbonisation with a current focus on retrofitting, so some of you might well have come across him. So just as a quick overview, I'm going to look at what we've identified as some sector priorities in the work we've done since lockdown, really, and going beyond that. Then I'm going to have a look at energy efficiency for new homes in terms of the Fed's position and some of the things we've said more publicly about it. Moving on to members' commitment to quality and sustainability of new homes and the potential for the sector to show leadership. And then finally, looking at what our asks of government are, which is pretty important if we want to make sure that we get to the national targets. So if you could have the next slide, please. So in terms of sector priorities, I mean, you can obviously read these yourself, but quite a lot of our work since lockdown has been around social housing as part of the economic recovery. And we're also very focused on not losing sight of the housing crisis and climate change, as Ali was usefully setting out just now. So a lot of our discussions with government have been about the need for a green recovery, which is really important. We've got 10 years, really, in the next 10 years, we've got to make significant change on decarbonisation, but also on building safety, and that's a huge challenge, as well as delivering hundreds of new homes. So we also recognise that housing association staff have had a huge role during the pandemic, and they've done an enormous amount of work, and just recognition for the work that they've been doing. And we've understood more about residents and our customer base and their vulnerabilities, but also there have been some real positives about, we've had lots of feedback about how members have been interacting with their residents using digital platforms and advancing with some of the work that they thought would take 3 or 4 years, and it's been done in a few months. So that's really fantastic. And it's all about how we've been able to work agilely as a sector and embrace new ways of working. And hopefully that will stand us in pretty good stead for what's coming. So if we could go on to the next slide, please. So in terms of energy efficiency for new homes, well, I don't need to tell you what the policy driver is. I'm not going to read it out, but basically we've got a huge part to play in this. If we're going to meet our decarbonisation or net zero targets as a country, housing absolutely has to play its part. So most of the view of the Fed has been set out in our response to the Future Home Standard that came out earlier this year. We actually said that after we'd spoken to members that we didn't think that the targets went far enough, fast enough to be able to meet the net zero emissions. And that was more around actually just planning out properly so that we didn't have to retrofit any homes that were relatively new. As I said, we've got an enormous amount of work to do in the next 10 years. If we have to go back and retrofit homes that have been built in the last few years, we won't have enough time. We absolutely won't have enough time. But there is a real need for the sector to be able to understand what it has to achieve and what the expectations are, and to have the clarity that it needs to be able to progress and build homes that are fit for purpose. So it's an ask to have the information clearly up front, and then to be able to build properly and make sure that homes are fit for the future. And a really key point as well is support for a fabric first approach to development of future homes. So that will, but also to focus on minimising the long-term maintenance and service charge costs of residents, and the need to not have to retrofit relatively new homes. And one of the key things that came up in discussion when talking to members about that was often about homes that members acquire from other places like Section 106, or they buy off the shelf. If you don't have control of things like the technology that goes into those new homes, it can be really, really challenging from a repairs and maintenance point of view, and it can mean that actually you have additional costs to look after those homes. So there's something about making sure that as a sector we can articulate very clearly what it is that we want and need, because unlike many developers who sell all their homes at the point of sale and then don't have to worry about them, the key thing for our sector is, because we manage homes throughout their life cycle, that it's in our interest to be really, really clear about what we want and need. So the other big point was advocacy for levelling up of existing local standards. And I know that the Future Homes consultation did put forward that actually everything might be consistent across the whole country, but that felt like a real wasted opportunity to not build on the expertise and capacity that had already been built up in places like Greater Manchester and London. So all that learning and experience of delivery, what a waste for that all to go away. Members were absolutely saying, let's not go backwards. So you can access our full response from our website. But looking forward slightly, this is also about, it's such a huge amount of work to do. We need to be working in partnership with others. So we're connected in with the House Builders Federation, are shaping a Future Homes Task Force at the moment. There's scope for us to work more with local authorities. We need to collaborate and work in partnership to make sure that we can deliver. And you know, the number of homes we have to retrofit and build are absolutely staggering, as Alison said. So, you know, it's really worth planning ahead a bit and thinking about how we might do that. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So our other focus at the Federation has been making the case for, as I said, the green recovery. And we've been doing that through a once in a generation campaign and thinking about investment in social housing. So we've been making the case to government that actually by supporting social housing, there are real opportunities to hit a number of really key policy ambitions. So greening homes, levelling up, making the case for reskilling, new jobs. Many of you will have seen the work we've been doing on this at the Federation. We've had a number of weeks of action, one of which has focused on sustainability. But this is part of us as a sector talking about what we're doing and leading conversations so we can advocate for the work that many of you are already doing and make the case for the work that you could do if you had the right support. So this is really about making sure that you're in the best position that you can be to build partnerships, supply chains, train up your staff, reskill them, and work at scale and pace to be able to meet these ambitions. And one of the things that really makes me think think about the scale of what is needed is when you think about if we're moving away from gas central heating, for example, to a low carbon heating, think of all the people who work in the sector who do gas compliance or gas fitting. And actually over time, in the next 20 years, actually most of them will probably need retraining or will have a completely different focus. So it's significant. But then the other issue I think that's really, really key to this is understanding resident and consumer behaviour and demand. So most people know what a gas boiler is, but most people probably don't know what a ground source heat pump is or an air source heat pump, or why you might have to go for the fabric first approach. And we need to do a lot more as a sector to understand what our residents think and how we can work with them. There's been some quite interesting publications recently. So the National Grid has just published some consumer research, and actually I spoke to someone who was who led that work stream on the original Zero Carbon Hub, and they said they'd been reviewing that work quite recently and it was still incredibly valid. But I think as landlords who work together with residents, as you know, it's a common way of working across the sector. We've got a really huge role to play in promoting how that can be done well and how we can listen to residents and hear what they're saying, make sure that the changes that come with new decarbonised and net zero homes actually are ones that people want to live in and that they understand how to live in them. And I think we're going to hear a bit more about some of the detail about that. But we're also keen to map and share best practice. We know that loads of our members have a real commitment to the net zero agenda, but they also have a real focus on the quality of their homes and that they're sustainable for the long term. So we want to be able to showcase how some of that has been done and bring in information and support from other sectors and from other sources. So final slide, please. And so this is almost one of the most important bits. The government asks, so what do we need from government to be able to meet these targets? Overall, we need clarity as a sector. We need a really clear roadmap for delivery, and this has to be set out policy certainty around interim targets and standards. So you have to have that to be able to plan accordingly and make sure that you can focus your business plans on whichever targets you need to meet and you know how that can be achieved. But there's also a real role for clear expectations and supporting guidance. Thinking about building safety, just quickly, we have very similar asks around some of the aspects of that work. If you want a huge cultural change or behavioural changes across the sector, then you absolutely need to back that up if you're government and you're in that position to be able to do it with clear guidance and expectations. And that goes from setting out, you know, past the frame of the current government, you know, right up to 2050, what is potentially required. But it also means that you have to be able to monitor what has been done and make changes so that those targets remain fit for purpose. If we have targets and no one meets them, we won't meet the overall target. So there has to be a bit of monitoring and understanding what's actually being carried out. And then the other thing we need from government is strategy. So that's really support for finance and investment for the sector to be able to deliver. It's not saying we need you to pay for everything. It's saying we need you to help us be able to lever in investment and have finance that suits the type of work that we are going to have to be doing. We need flexibility and an agile approach to funding and investment. We need the timing of interim standards to work properly. We need coordination of research, evidence and data and tests data. If we're using new materials, we're bringing new types of technology together, then we absolutely have to have certainty that it works, and it works for the people that live in those homes. We can't be in a position where we're left with a lot of homes that have bits of kit that need replacing in 10 years. And we need to learn from other work programs. So as I mentioned, that's building safety, that's the work that is going on around MMC and building better, which is fantastic. But fundamentally, we need a joined up government. We're in a position where we have lots of work coming out of BEIS, but we also know that standards are held by MHCLG because they do the building regulations. Every single government department has climate change targets. It's about time that we encourage them to work together more closely so they can understand the cumulative impact of a lot of the work that is quite challenging for the sector at the moment. So as we mentioned, that's supply, decarbonisation, building safety, dealing with Brexit and a post-COVID recovery. So I think that's probably about enough for me. So I'm going to hand over now to John. Thank you.
It's fine. Thanks very much for that, Amy. John, if you want to try, you can control your own slides. If you don't want to try and do that, you should be able to do it.
I shall certainly have
Before you start, John, just going to remind everybody, please do get your questions in using the question box on your screens on the right-hand side. John, over to you.
Thank you very much. Let's see if I can get it to click. See if I can master it. There we are. Okay, it seems to be working. Let's see if I can get through this. So thank you, Amy. John Bedford, Technical Director from WHG. I just want to touch on some of the topics that you can see on this slide: design materials, technology, experience, opportunity, success challenges and pitfalls. There are a lot of information on these slides, so please do read them and digest them. I won't go through all of the words, but we'll certainly pick up some questions at the end. So just a little bit about me. Unfortunately, I've been around quite a while. I have a background in architecture for over 35 years, and I was one of the first eco-homes assessors back in 1999. That's where my journey started. Went through a period of MMC research and was proud to be able to design, build and run the first MMC factory for an affordable provider back in 2010, which is still going strong, using timber frame close body panels. And that's really the point that I want to go to in this presentation. It's all about fabric first that Amy has mentioned. So let's just have a look at design. It's important to design for aspect and orientation in the UK. I'm not sure whether you're aware, but we are relatively appropriate to the equator with a 34-degree maximum pitch to capture PV. So that lends itself well to a pitched roof design in our country. We always want to adopt fabric first principles with a good U value. We need to understand ventilation, seal right and ventilate, seal tight and ventilate right. And as Amy has reiterated, it's all about user friendliness too. Thermal mass and solar gain is an issue. We've mentioned overheating in the past, but it's all about getting your insulation performance and thickness correct. Europe are moving towards a primary energy as a target consumption limit. I think we can do the same. So we need to start looking at that with the new Future Home Standard and beyond 2025. I think now is right to start thinking about DFMA, Design for Manufacture and Assembly house types, ready for the MMC evolution. It is coming, if not already here. Looking at decarbonisation of the grid and the 2022 energy tax changes that I think was intimated in the spring budget, whether it's going to be cheap electricity or expensive gas, we're not quite sure, but it's certainly looking towards electricity as being the primary energy for the future. Design to the pyramids of need, which if it'll click, there we go. I'm not sure whether you're aware of this, but we've got the Maslow and the waste hierarchies. We also have a Kyoto hierarchy of design standards. Always look at reduced heat loss. That's your fabric first approach, and selecting your energy source should be the last thing that you should consider doing. Oops, sorry, just go back, if I may. Is it going back, Stuart? No, it's not. I need to go back, but I can't, unfortunately. If you could do that for me, do apologise. Thank you very much. Do we all remember the Green Guide? That gave us some insight into the performance of materials. It's a very useful document. We should still use it, but understand the effects of the performance of the materials. Density versus insulation and thermal mass we've talked about. I have a particular view on that, but it is one that is subjective to the type of design. Always consider embedded carbon. Timber is actually carbon neutral. You only release carbon from timber when you burn it. So it's a very useful carbon neutral material, and we shouldn't ignore that, although there are a lot of lightweight steel gauge systems coming onto the market. Life cycle carbon around transport and manufacture, not just the product in use, and also the circular economy. I do believe now that I think IKEA are looking to lease kitchens for the period, for the life of that particular product, and then look to take it back and recycle it and supply with a new one at the end of life. Phase change materials are playing a bigger and bigger part. We're looking at Sunamp product, which is a fascinating material that is a liquid state until heated, and then it turns into a solid and provides heat whilst it's doing that. And we must also remember the climate effect on materials as well. We're looking at a lot of render discoloration now due to our milder and damper winters. And technology. You don't need me really to tell you about the main sort of 6 technologies that are out there. But the one thing to do, which Amy picked up on, is to remember the off and onable rule, as I always call it, from the creature comforts era, when the electricity companies wanted to sell electricity as a heat source. But we need to really do remember that it's got to be user friendly. But we can go one step further. If we look at really low heat loads and power consumption that can be supported by a fabric first approach, then we can start to rely and have confidence in some of the technologies that we're now seeing being used more widely. So all electric systems with radiant carbon panels. One thing that I particularly am interested in is the kinetic Bluetooth switching, which is a switch system that doesn't rely on wiring. Another particular product that I've been doing some research on is saline battery technology. So that's actually salt water, seawater, and we've experimented with a home that has a 1 ton saline battery, which is a metre squared, and that can provide 7 kilowatts of power. The only problem is it can only cycle once a day, so it doesn't just charge like a normal battery. You have to manage it very well, but that could well be the future. One thing that I really do like to tell our residents about, which is peak demand management, and I'll come on to that in a moment. And also there are some great systems on the market for low energy and low powered circuits controlling homes. Next slide please, Stuart. Thank you. So peak demand management, what does that mean? Well, if you imagine that the average PV array on a home produces around 1.8 kilowatts, let's say, so you get up for your low energy breakfast or your low carbon breakfast of tea, toast and beans. If you actually switch all three appliances on at once, which is your kettle, your toaster and your microwave, perhaps if you do microwave your beans, you're consuming 3.8 kilowatts. So it's costing you 2 kilowatts. If you manage your peak demand, and that can be done through smart sockets and internal smart grids, you boil your kettle, then you put your toaster on, then you cook your beans quickly as you can so it doesn't get cold, but you then only use 1.8 kilowatts peak, which actually means it's free. So when you explain things like that to residents who have an array, it means quite a bit to their savings. Next one, Stuart. Thank you. So a bit of experience. Unfortunately, I don't admit this to very many people, but you lot are now going to know. I am a caravan tourer, and living in a caravan or touring a caravan is the quickest way to learn how you can live off 45 litres of water a day and a dual circuit system of 12 volts and 24 volts. But it's always have the best fabric. That's what we advocate. But space heating is now not the problem today. It's hot water demand. We know how to insulate buildings, but it is about hot water. Talk briefly about Saline and get the ventilation system right. Mr. Bishop was a resident of ours who relied on oxygen, and he moved into a bungalow that was a very highly efficient bungalow with a mechanical ventilation heat recovery system. He rang me up 9 months after moving in. And he said, I don't know what you've done, John, but I haven't used oxygen in the 9 months that I've been in this bungalow. And that to me just absolutely clarifies that ventilation systems are massively important. We get a lot of complaints with mold growth from residents, and it is really down to the right ventilation systems. There is a current debate around battery storage and diverters. Good diverters are on the market now, which takes PV directly into your hot water tank. Which actually is competing against the efficiency of batteries. But having said that, I think battery technology is going to play a massive part in going forward. And be more like Emma. Emma was another resident who benefited from PV diverter and battery storage in her home. 5 people in her home. It was a 3-storey house. And Emma managed her peak demand management, as we've seen earlier, and got her bills down to £37 per month. Which was a brilliant saving for her and her family. And we actually do have a model, which we haven't built yet, but that could provide heat and power at 0 cost. And actually, it's £6.79 per year. Thanks, Stuart. And opportunities for scale. This is a photograph of a plant in Gussing, which is a gasification plant. And it actually serves 700 homes by burning all of the local rubbish, including, I hasten to add, car tyres, which are the most notorious of elements to recycle. And it's done through a huge amount of carbon filtration systems, but it supplies, as I said, 700 local homes. But not only that, it supplies a drying plant that deals with, I think, 60% of Europe's demand for clip timber flooring. So it really is a superb opportunity. But of course, technology will get cheaper. The electric car is already here, and that seems to have come really, really quickly. And there are many people looking at energy service companies as well that will provide localised generation of electricity and managed for their residents through an ESCO. We haven't really said a lot about MMC, but it is really the best opportunity, I believe, for quality and performance. We're doing a huge amount of research on that at WHG. My experience tells me that it's the way to go. And we're also looking at communal battery plants and shared peak generation to see whether we can't share the power and capture all of that in large battery plants that are serving estates of 20, 30, 40 dwellings. Thank you, Stuart. So a few successes, challenges, pitfalls, a few anecdotes really. The point I would make is never mix and match, abide by the pyramids of hierarchy that you saw earlier. We've seen what happens when heat pumps and other modern technologies are used with baseline specifications, and by that I mean previous building regulations of perhaps 2013, when it's, the fabric first principle has probably not been adhered to, and they fail if it's not looked at in a real holistic way. But we're British, we know our climate. We invented the bungalow, believe it or not. We did so in India to try and keep cool with a large roof covering, a veranda, and we love the patio. And the reason I put those 2 points there is because we love our gardens inside and out. And there is an advert, I think, that shows English people trying to barbecue in the snow. We love the outside, and we need to have our homes not only smart, but have occupants smart as well, so that our own customers know how to use the dwelling properly, and that the technology doesn't take over and rely on a different way of living. And again, someone said to me, it's cold in here because the radiator's not hot. Well, no, but the temperature is. So we need to educate our customers and users to understand that the radiator doesn't always have to come on because the building is so very well insulated. And lightweight does not always equal overheating. As Professor Crom said in the 60s, when he designed a house with movable insulation, so it actually captured where the overheating was and where the insulation needed to be. And smart design can do that today. So really it's all about heating the air in the house and not the occupants or the furniture, so that you don't lose your heat through heat sinking. And Charles Darwin said it's not the strongest or the most intelligent who will survive, but those who can manage change. And how right he is. Thanks, Stuart.
Okay, John, thank you so much. Right, we're going to hand over to Ali now, just to come back with some more thoughts from Raven. So, Ali, over to you.
Thanks, Stuart, and thanks, Amy and John. I have the challenge of making sure I don't repeat what was in those very comprehensive presentations, but build on them. So as I said earlier, I'm the development director here at Raven. Just briefly, who are Raven? You probably do know us if you joined this webinar, but memorable name. We are a housing association based in Surrey. Our stock covers Surrey and Sussex. We've got about 6,000 homes, and we are an actively developing housing association. Now, is that slide going to move on? There we go. Purely by chance, I realised this morning when I put this slide together, I've picked a photo from all of our tenures that we're developing at the moment. So, as I say, actively developing housing association. We've got social rent on there, affordable rent, shared ownership and private sales. So we have a market sales subsidiary that delivers homes to generate additional cross subsidy for the organisation. So net zero carbon. Some of you might have heard me talk about this cartoon before, especially in May when it was first published in The Economist. For me, it really sums up very well what's happening in the world at the moment. I might just draw an extra kind of Brexit person between the coronavirus and climate change. But essentially, you know, this is us at the moment. We are dealing with the coronavirus as a day-to-day. It might feel a little bit BAU now, but it most certainly isn't business as usual for us. And this is a real big challenge for the UK, for housing sectors and for the world. And we really are yet to see the economic impact. We just don't know how long the virus is here to stay in terms of if there's a vaccine coming. You know, how long will social distancing be around? You know, and my partner was saying, you know, you could add in a few little extra cartoons down the line of once we've defeated this one, a little coronavirus popping up here and then as we deal with pockets as that happens. But it really kind of sums up things is we've got that bigger, beefier, more threatening contender of climate change waiting in the wings. But the reality is that's here now. As I said earlier, it's something we need to start addressing now if we're going to meet the 2050 targets, and the others have spoken to that effect. So pre-pandemic, there were lots of conversations happening at boards and execs around our response to net zero carbon and the government's announcement. And that was discussing about what that meant for development and asset management strategies. In the main, For us at Raven, we decided at that point in time that we weren't going, so this was around February time, that we weren't going to be committing to any new homes that weren't net zero carbon, or certainly didn't go a long way to meeting net zero carbon, recognising that there will be decarbonisation of the grid and cheaper technologies as we get closer to that 2050 target. But ultimately, you know, we're setting out our stall with new homes need to be net zero carbon, and I'll come on to how we propose to meet that in a moment. So part of the reason for that was we just didn't want to be building the retrofit cost into the business. And as Amy was saying earlier, you know, if you're a new resident and you've been in the home 10, 15 years, and then suddenly you're either being decanted because the work's so invasive, or you've got this really disruptive work happening to get your home up to net zero carbon, something that was known about when your home was built, it just doesn't feel right. I spent much of my early career involved in extra care delivery, and we were often demolishing existing older persons' accommodation to facilitate the new. And some of those blocks were 30 years old, and it always sat really, it was a lesson I kind of took with me, and I never wanted to be involved in stuff that didn't have that full life that you'd expect a new build home to have. So if I can move on to the next slide. There we go. So as I said, all our homes we're now working on are going to be net zero carbon. And this is all heavily caveated with, we haven't actually built any of these yet, but they are all at varying degrees of progression. And it is our main driver now is to meet the net zero carbon on these new homes. So as John was talking about, that fabric first approach, we're taking a standard approach, as many of you would expect, with a cascade, obviously anticipating site constraints and different sites having different challenges. But for us, that fabric first is typically going to be through off-site construction. I'm glad John didn't say too much about it, because I'll talk a bit more about that on my next slide. But that quality assurance, that real kind of attention to detail and that factory environment just means meeting that fabric first approach is much easier and much more controlled and consistent in a factory setting than it is necessarily being built through traditional. So for us, it's just about eliminating that risk. And I think we have to recognise that with the construction sector, we have had challenges around quality assurance and control. You know, we still have sites now where we're opening up to assess kind of fire stopping, and you know, with the filming and the ISO standards for manufacturing off-site, then we just don't have those issues. And also for us, it lends itself really well to BIM. We're very keen that our new homes are delivered with BIM models. So again, they work well together. So what is our standardised approach? So as I said, fabric first, and very much in line with the Kyoto pyramid we talked about earlier. It's about having a low emissions home. So if you can reduce the demand at the output at the beginning, talking to John's point, and then build up from that, that's exactly what we're trying to do. So the key elements are kind of minimising the heating demand. So you've got triple glazing, zero or near zero thermal bridging, talked about ventilation, so MVHR, LED lighting, and zoned heating controls is another key important component as well. And orientation, again, as John was talking about, that solar gain and making sure you're orientating your site to work in the best way for efficiency. So as heat demand is reducing, the proportion of demand from energy for hot water is going up. So that becomes an important element, a more important element in terms of consideration of design. We're taking an approach that most of our sites will allow for ground source heat pumps, and we're doing that through a communal array. So we've been working with a company called Kensa, who have developed a communal array system. And that works really well for us for a number of reasons. So firstly, most of our sites are houses and flats, and the communal array works well for that. In terms of the apartment or the flats, it deals with some of the issues we've had with other technologies around overheating in communal areas. You won't get that to the same degree because of the way you're bringing the energy into the building. So each property has its own kind of heat pump. That's the shoebox technology that many of you heard talked about. Not quite shoebox, but you know, it's certainly not the experience many of us had when you walk into a property. You go, oh, this is brilliant. Look at the size of this cupboard. And you open up and it's just full of kit. We're hoping to avoid some of that and improve that resident experience of living in a sustainable home. So it also, we think it has huge benefits in terms of our retrofit programme. So if we have a regeneration site within existing Raven estate and we're doing ground source heat pumps, then it absolutely makes sense to be looking at how we can put the infrastructure in place to support the retrofit of existing homes in the area to plug into that. So that's excellent for us. Cost, you're all probably waiting for me to kind of light up your world and say it's an extra £3 grand. I wish it was. It's not. We're broadly in line with the figures that Savills have published over the summer around additional costs. So you're looking at around an extra kind of 10–15% as an average across our sites. About 5% of that you could probably say is the off-site construction and 10% is the net zero carbon. But as you can appreciate, because they're so kind of wedded together, it's a little bit difficult to decouple those costs. One of the key things is about considering the resident experience, and again, absolutely something that John was drawing out. This is going to be a behavioural change for residents against the kind of traditional building regs home. And we need to make sure that we're supporting those residents so that they understand that the home is different and that they can live in it in such a way that uses the technology in the best way to make it as comfortable as possible for them, but also to improve affordability. Absolutely, that's one of the key drivers for us, is improve affordability for our residents, because that makes their lives easier. It also means they're more likely to pay their rent, which obviously is something that we all want to ensure happens. So I talked a lot there about MNC. So for us, how we're approaching that is Building Better, which some of you may have heard of, but we are a founding board member of Building Better here at Raven. And it really kind of sings to how we want to operate. We're really keen to collaborate with others and work together in how we can respond to the challenges we're all seeing in the sector. And essentially what Building Better is doing is getting organisations to work together. And apologies that there is a slide that's obviously missing that's got the logos on of how many there are. So there's 10 of us at the moment. And collectively, we have a 5-year development pipeline of about 40,000 homes. So I think you can appreciate if I rocked up with my 200 homes a year to the market and said, oh, even if I was putting all of them in, come and talk to me. They would come and talk to me, but I probably wouldn't have a big seat at the table when you look at the scale of deals that are being done at the moment. Whereas as part of Building Better, we're able to kind of buy into that collective buying power and do things together. One of the other benefits around Building Better is it's sector driven. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to have procurement framework, we are in the process of getting procurement framework in place for volumetric and for panelised. That'll be in place by April. And that is about, again, buying in collectively together. And then leading on from that is about the shared experience. So my site that I deliver through Building Better won't be a pilot site. By the time I'm starting on site, I'm hearing what BPHA have done or Golding Homes have done or Catalyst have done, and we're bringing that learning in together so that each site is an improvement of what's happened before. And we're trying to get, then we'll be moving on to standardisation. So think about the car, if you can have that chassis standardised, and then each housing association can add on its own components on top of that if it wishes to. And then the other element of it is data. We all know the importance of data-driven decisions, and data is going to be really key in influencing how people see how these new homes are performing, how we're proving net zero carbon is working, but also in terms of whole life costs. One of the arguments for off-site construction is reduced whole life costings. If we can demonstrate that in reality, we can all update our business plans accordingly, and we can also have serve to influence these conversations with lenders about how they see net zero carbon and off-site construction. So that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but that's me finished. So I will hand back over to Stuart.
That's great. Thank you so much, Ali, and thank you to Amy and John as well. Okay, so we've got just over 10 minutes for some questions now. So I'm going to go straight to it. I think there's one here actually for you, Amy, which is Daniel Rendell's asked if you can talk a wee bit more about homes at the heart and just about the economic impact the impact housing associations can play in terms of that economic recovery. Just wondered if there was more you could say on that in terms of the sustainability question in particular. You're muted, Amy.
Ah, right, there you are. Sorry, I think I managed to press the button twice. That's very clever. Yeah, so actually what was really good was that the Homes at the Heart campaign actually influenced our comprehensive spending review submission, which got sort of pulled at the last minute, but actually we submitted it anyway because what it allowed us to do was to bring together a lot of examples of some of the work that members were doing, and it really started off fitting into like our ask for recovery, but then really making the case that a green recovery is absolutely the way to go because of the way that it can help reskill, build capacity in the sector. It's counter-cyclical. Housing associations often step into the frame when there are issues with the rest of the economy. It brings jobs, it helps meet longer term targets. I mean, what I can do is make sure that I can send some links to where the rest of the information is on our website, and I think there was lots on Twitter as well. And I'm pretty sure we've probably published our CSR submission, but I will check, and if we have, then I'll make sure that's available too.
Cool, that's great. Thank you, Amy. Ali, there's loads of questions coming for you. You'll be delighted to know. I think there's, I mean, the general theme of this. There's a question from Anthony Holt, which I'll go through a couple actually, and you can maybe come back. But there's a question from Anthony Holt, just asking simply, a smaller housing association, you're looking to meet the challenges ahead. Where do we start? You know, again, you're well placed to maybe answer that. But there's a couple of other ones on here. You know, asking about some of the costs that you picked up on in terms of what you're seeing in terms of the extra costs of the new build, if you're, as you say, committing to using MMC to meet the Fabric First side of things, and also in terms of going for the net zero carbon. So just there's a question there about whether you're absorbing those costs yourselves as Raven, or whether there's any government support available for you to do that. So yeah, there's a couple of other ones in here as well, but perhaps you want to pick up on that initially, if that's okay, Ali.
Yeah, no, that's great, thank you. Yeah, so where to start? If I'm honest, I think it's really important to have those conversations about what I was saying about that tension, maybe the wrong word, but the kind of where you're looking at investing, you know, how far do you want to go with your existing stock and how quickly, because that is going to have a bearing on how you see your development program. If your board says, you know, your retrofit program, you want to be net zero carbon by say 2035, which get going 3 days ago, then you know your new build program is going to have to be net zero carbon now. But if your board wants to take a more pragmatic approach or a more deferred approach, then you need to be having those conversations now and agree what their priorities and what their approach wants to be, because again, you know, we should see technology reducing, as I said earlier, the cost of technology reducing, and as I said earlier, we'll have the decarbonisation of the grid as well, which will start to close that gap. And I'd also think if you're doing 106s, you should be having, as Amy said earlier, have those conversations about, is that still something you want to be bringing in? If you're bringing in technology that might be more expensive to retrofit than something you control. And then the second question around cost, so whether we're absorbing, that is the big challenge. Obviously we're factoring it in now when we're buying land. The reality is, in terms of buying land, most of our deals that are being successful now are subject to planning ones, because obviously we can get in earlier and have those conversations with people about kind of the reality of the land value we can pay for it. And we're finding a lot of people are interested in who we are and why we want to do it. The reality is many won't be, but there are still some people out there who will take that kind of deferred payment, and you can plan a site to make it work financially for you. Where it's stuff we already had in train and we want to be net zero carbon, yes, we are absorbing the cost. The cost per unit is higher for us on those. We're going through that, kind of looking at our hurdle rates at the moment and seeing, do they need to move because our cost per unit is going to go up? And the reality is, unless there is sufficient grant support, the number of homes we can deliver comes down. But you know, the HP that has been published recently, they do talk about innovation and offsite construction being a priority. So, you know, when we're bidding, the conversations with Homes England is, look, this is exactly the approach we're taking. And it doesn't, one of the challenges we will have is we're trying to do social rent on those sites as well. So that adds to the affordability of them as well. But it is a challenge, but it's one that we think worth taking now, because otherwise we'll be spending 20, 30 grand in 10 years time on them.
Great. Okay, Ali, thank you so much for that. So there's a ton of questions here. I'm conscious we've got 5 minutes. I'm going to try and get through a couple more things if we can. A couple of questions on here about green technology, sustainable technologies. So I'll probably come to you on these, John, if that's okay. I loved the example, but Mr. Bishop, you know, I thought that was fantastic, and I think there was a number of kind of points in your remarks, certainly, about just the importance of you know, the customer experience, and Amy talked about this as well. So I think it's just you know, really interesting on that score. But in terms of the green technologies that we're looking at using, there's a couple of questions in here, quite specific ones actually, but there's one asking about the use of Internet of Things and artificial intelligence and the role of that in terms of what we're looking at in terms of making the homes as easy as possible to live in and also maintain. And then there's another question around kinetic lighting. I have no idea what that is, and the low voltage Ethernet power. So again, this over my head, but maybe things that are very familiar to you, I'm sure. But if you had any thoughts on those, John, just briefly, if you could. There's a couple more things I want to get through after this, but please, if you could answer those.
Of course, Stuart, thank you very much. Let me just go back to Mr. Bishop for a bit, because I think what we didn't make the point about is how that connects with the cost of Mr. Bishop's health, looking after Mr. Bishop. I mean, if he's not using oxygen for 9 months, I don't know what oxygen costs, but that sort of connection back to the NHS cost is something we really need to capture if we're going to do that sort of thing in the future. So looking at kinetic technology and Bluetooth and Ethernet supplies, there are a few companies that do that. One is ELE, which is extreme low energy, which we've had experience of. They use 12-volt systems in a similar way to back-to-back wiring of computer systems in offices, which is really, really clever. Not only does it do that, but when it goes through the hub, it actually monitors what every product has been turned on within the house, how much energy it's using, and you can govern its switchability through that system really quite easily. And that leads me on then to obviously smart houses and clever technology within homes that really need to build on the usability of homes. Residents or our customers need to be able to operate things easily, comfortably, as second nature. And if you can use technology to support that and think ahead and switch products off and on or systems off and on within the home to help people save energy, then I'm all for it. And those systems are out there and they will become cheaper. As Alison said, technology will become cheaper.
Great, thank you very much, John. Time to squeeze in one last one, I think. Question here from Nigel Newman about how long did the panel think it will be until the regulator expects to see net zero carbon costs built into business plans and regulates accordingly? Maybe one for you initially, Amy, and others if you've got any thoughts.
Trying to unmute. Right, hello. I think pretty soon, actually, to be honest. If you think about the life of a business plan, about 30 years, and we're in 2020 now, that takes us to 2050. So actually, it will be a deal, and I expect the regulator to bring it in relatively quickly. The only other thing that I would say is that we've already got various forms of reporting across the sector, SCCR, ESOS, and then there's also ESG, so some of the other things that are already going on. So whether that's monitoring returns on those types of things, or whether it's around just, you know, the long-term viability of the organisation, value for money particularly, and you know, things like the home standard maybe. But definitely one to keep an eye on, I would think, although I don't have an inside track. I wish I did.
Yeah,
Thank you,
same as Amy.
Ali, you don't have anything, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, don't have an inside track, but I would agree it's coming soon. I think that it'll have to be carefully managed because you can't have organisations just breaking their business plans by putting in meeting net zero carbon. So it has to be part of actually what are we trying to achieve? Is it, you know, 80%? Is it 80% of stock? Is it whatever by 2050? Is it by 2050? And what government or funding support is available for it. I think that's going to be a big challenge, and how they manage that will be really interesting.
Okay. All right. Well, we are sadly out of time, so apologies, we've not got quite through all the questions, but I will put the other ones to the panel. There's a couple more there for you, Ali, actually, so I'll maybe come to you with those separately, but and we'll make sure those get answered. But yeah, thank you all very much for joining us today.
Sure.
Thank you very much to the panel for your time, and yeah, there'll be the recording of the webinar sent out to everybody, as well as the slides. Hope you enjoyed it. And the next, there's 2 more of these Journey to Zero Carbon webinars to come. There's one on Thursday this week and one on Thursday next week. So hopefully you can join us for those as well. But for now, thank you very much.
Thank you.